When I was about 2 years old, I guess, my dad left. I reconnected with my father when I was about 5 years old, with just summer holidays and stuff like that. He was an alcoholic. He drank quite a bit. But again, his influence in my life was just basically July and August through most of my life, the occasional birthday and stuff like that. And when I was a teenager, I guess, or started out as a teenager, there was a lot of emptiness, I think, and maybe even searching for something, but not knowing what I was searching for. When I left Brooks and moved to Edmonton, it was a nice change, a change of pace. I actually met my ex-wife my first month in Edmonton. We were living together, I think, within 6 months. We were engaged by the end of the year. I think we got married a year later, and then 2 years after that, we had our first daughter. 5 years after having our first daughter, we had our second daughter. With basically my family being my whole purpose, as things started to change, kids are starting to have their own lives. My ex-wife obviously wanted to have a life of her own, but we never worked as that kind of dynamic before. So it brought out anxiety. It brought out, again, I guess, trust issues. My dad, when he was complaining about having some hip pain, and then it was a few months later that I got a phone call from him, and he was diagnosed with a tumor in his body cavity. Dad had been sick for a year or two, I believe it was. I came home on one Friday and found out that my wife wanted a divorce, and it was just over at that moment. I can just remember basically shock, kind of losing it really, emotionally, not knowing what was going on. I felt worthless, I felt lost. The big thing was I felt lost. I just didn't know where to go. So it was just basically a lot of routine, going to work, go home, going to work, go home, sometimes sleep, sometimes no sleep. It was just basically I was on autopilot for months on end. I hadn't spoken to my brother, I think, in quite a few years, I think. And I hadn't realized that he'd found God. Yeah, that's when he said, I knew something was up, and God told me I should give you a call. And yeah, he's just, my little brother turned into my big brother. After the separation I talked to my dad just about every day on the phone. Bought flights and went out to BC for the day, to the Lower Mainland, to visit him and spent a day with him. And then it was 2 or 3 weeks later, but I got a call from my uncle saying that he had passed. After Dad did pass, I did definitely feel guilt and shame because of the disconnect and us wasting so much time on top of the loss or the hurt. So after all this stuff had happened and Dad had passed, my younger brother invited my youngest daughter and I to Celebration Church. Right away I said no, and my youngest daughter was able to talk me into finally coming. After the first time, my daughter wanted to keep coming. So that was my primary drive for coming originally, was just it didn't seem like a bad environment for my daughter, and it was an opportunity to spend more time with my daughter. So we've been coming to church on and off for, I believe, 2 or 3 years. Last August of 2022, after Risen Camp, Baptism Sunday, Pastor Joel was on stage. I can't remember if it was something he was saying, or if it was something that he said, or if it was actually as the baptisms even started. I can't recall. I just had this big, massive wave of emotion hit me. I didn't understand what it was. I didn't know what was going on. I just felt, I think I wanted to be baptized, but didn't think I was worthy. I didn't think, just with the shame and guilt and my failed marriage and everything else, I felt that the only way I could give back to the church was possibly through serving. And so after service that day, we ended up signing up for next steps for the next week. So the next week, my youngest daughter and I attended the next steps. And it wasn't very far through the session that I experienced that same wave of emotion and that intense feeling that I felt at the Baptism Sunday, the Sunday before. So out of fear of breaking down in front of my daughter and everybody else that was in the room, I asked the host if we could go talk in another room. I discussed with him what I was feeling, what I was experiencing. He did a salvation prayer with me, and that's when I accepted Jesus Christ in my life. I just felt lighter. I felt like all the weight of the world had come off my shoulders. I felt hopeful. I felt just pure relief, like I'd found something. So September 2022, I was baptized. I think the biggest thing for me was renewal, a feeling of renewal, a feeling of a new start from the old. So the first couple of months after baptism, I just got more involved. I started serving in the parking crew, wanted to know more, started joining connect groups, connecting with more people than I did before. Prayer, reading scripture, anything to learn. I just want to learn. On emotional side, I guess I'm happier. I feel happier. And there's this sense of self now where I want to start taking care of myself. After all the guilt, after all the shame, the being alone and the pain and everything, I understand that Jesus is there and I'm not alone.